a little deeper with my hands. Remember, she's in the what she thinks is the air raid shelter of that old building that Papa sent her to. I dug a little deeper with my hands, but didn't get very far before I realized this wasn't a smart way to start a tunnel. At least I needed the shovel and more light than what came from the small flashlight, and I couldn't walk out of here with my entire body as filthy as my hands already were. That would get me noticed by every Stasi officer in Berlin, not to mention the border guards, informants, remember the people telling the secrets, and probably the great majority of the nosy neighbors within a square kilometer of this place. Before I dug any farther, I have to have a plan. I also had asked myself exactly how serious I was about escaping. Now that I knew what Papa wanted, I better understood just how dangerous it was for me to be standing here. I didn't have to dig or tunnel or do anything but be inside this air raid shelter to give them enough reason to arrest me, or worse, right? Kill her. And if I started, I would have to finish, because a half-dug tunnel was no different to the Stasi than a failed escape attempt, and my punishment would be no less severe. If I started, I was committing myself to literally do it or die, and my odds weren't exactly on the side of my success. My legs were shaking when I climbed out, and I took extra time to make sure the wood boards across the window looked exactly as they did the first time I found them. I'd been angry when I left here before, and I might have been more careless with the boards than I should have been. My footprints showed clearly in the softer part of the dirt, and Frau Eberhardt had already seen me with a shovel. I hadn't even started digging yet, and already my mistakes were mounting. I brushed over my tracks and then stuck to the hard soil instead, but I couldn't work up the nerve to dart across the empty field and into the alley. The best I could do was slink along the edge of the wall and hope, if anyone saw me, that I looked casual enough to escape any further attention. But it was nearly impossible to pretend that my senses weren't focused on every detail around me. If the watchtower guards had binoculars, they might look at my hands and wonder how they'd gotten so dirty. I wish I had pockets like the boys did for their pants, but my skirt didn't have any. So I hid my muddy fingers within the folds of my skirt, hoping that wouldn't look as strange or obvious to anyone else as it did to me. Every person I passed on the way home seemed to be watching me closer than usual, and the expression on my face might have invited questions, but nobody said a word. Perhaps God still granted miracles to those behind the Iron Curtain. Remember the Berlin Wall. The first thing I did after getting home was to scrub my hands until long after the water had run clean, or maybe until they had stopped shaking. When I finished, I found a note from Mama on the counter. She hoped to be at Oma Gertrude's only until Sunday, and thought if we were careful, there should be plenty of food in the house to last Fritz and me until then. And she was very clear that we weren't to get into any trouble or break any rules. Considering where I'd just come from, her note had come to me too late for me. I paced the apartment for the rest of the afternoon, debating whether to tell Fritz about the tunnel. I knew I shouldn't. Tunneling under the desk strip was probably impossible, and even if it wasn't, we'd still have to get through the tunnel without being shot like Anna's brother. Despite that, I couldn't stop thinking about the possibilities if I were to succeed. What would it take to build a tunnel? Lots of digging, well, obviously. Was I capable of all that on my own? Maybe, with enough time, but there was so much I didn't know. How would I know if I was going straight, or that it was steep enough? How would I know when it was safe to tunnel back up to the surface? That'd be my luck, to tunnel straight into the center of the death strip. Considering the limits of my own abilities, I knew I needed help. But Fritz was trying hard to be a model citizen, probably to get Claudia back, so I couldn't involve him, and there was no one else I trusted. If I was going to be smart about this, and it was about time I did something smart, then there was really only one option. Let the tunnel be a good idea that wasn't meant to happen. Meaning she should just give up on it. Do you think she should give up? Or do you think she should start digging? By the time Fritz came home, I decided for certain not to tell him. And I knew that was the right thing to do once I saw the slump of his shoulders and the frown on his face. He looked worse than sad. It was like he'd simply accepted what the state was doing to his life. He'd given up. Maybe he had good reason to look the way he did, but it was worse because I was helpless to cheer him up. Even if I could, there was nothing encouraging I dared say to him in our bugged apartment. Remember, they're always listening. He mumbled a hello and said he was going to his room. I offered to make dinner, which really only meant I was going to warm up Mama's leftovers from last night. It wasn't much, but it was something. When dinner was ready, I called him to the table, but there was no answer. Even if he was seriously depressed, Fritz was never one to ignore a chance to eat. Thinking he must have fallen asleep, I went to his bedroom and opened the door to tell him to come. But he wasn't sleeping. Fritz was at his desk, writing on a paper, and when his door opened, he turned it over in a blink. I didn't know hands could move that fast. Think about it. Why would he suddenly be turning the paper over? Is he hiding something? My eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Nothing, which was obviously a lie. Then his eyes darted around the room as if the Stasi's secret bugs would be that easy to find. Just a little extra homework, that's all. Oh, right. My voice might have sounded like I agreed with him, but the expression on my face made it perfectly clear I knew something more was going on. Food's ready. We shared the usual meaningless chatter over dinner. We talked about school, about how long my mom might be at Oma Gertrude's, and about our plans for the summer. I didn't care about any of it, and neither did he. Fritz did let one piece of actual news slip into the conversation, something I had suspected for a while but never dared to ask about. He had been fired from his bricklaying job, and we both knew why. Remember, because he was in cahoots, or he knew about Peter, Anna's brother's plan to escape. I've tried to find other work for this summer, but nothing's turned up yet. His voice was hopeful, but his eyes were dead. Does Mama know? Without Papa here, we counted on the money from Fritz's after-school job to get us through each year. Mama doesn't need any more worries. I thought again about the tunnel I could build. With his bricklaying skills, he could easily get a job in the West Germany, and their money was worth 5 times the value of ours. After supper, Fritz returned to his room with strict instructions that I was not allowed to enter without knocking. He'd never done that before, confirming my suspicions that he had some big secrets. I would have snuck in and peeked at his papers if he left his room, but he never did, not once. I didn't find anything out until breakfast the following morning. He came out of his room with the papers in hand. He commented on how cold it was and that he wanted a fire. It was actually a perfect spring morning, one in which we'd never build a fire, not unless we needed to burn Fritz's papers, of course. I told him that I'd help with the fire, and after it started, he let me see the papers. I had figured it must be some way of getting back with Claudia, but it wasn't. What he had written was so much worse. Page 1. There's no future for me. I'm leaving East Berlin tonight. My eyes widened, and I drew in a sharp breath. He shook his head as a warning for me to keep quiet, and then crumpled that page and threw it in the fire. Page 2. I found a place near the spree that isn't well guarded. I can run for the water and swim across before I'm seen. I shook my head as violently as I dared. The Spree was a powerful river, and the Berlin Wall ran along much of its wide banks. Large, heavy boats navigated that river, and everyone knew the current was stronger than it looked on the surface. Even for an experienced swimmer, it was dangerous. For Fritz, it would mean death. Remembering the microphones, he commented that the fire should get us warm soon. I was too stunned and angry to make any response. Then he raised his pages again. Page 3. I wanted you to know so you can explain to Mama. It's not fair, but it's the best I can do. No. I continued shaking my head, and tears stung my eyes. Personification. He wasn't the first to try escaping through the Spree, the river, and so many people died in that attempt. Either they drowned on the way, or else were shot in the back by Grenzers as they swam. Even on the small chance that Fritz got as far as jumping into the water, he wasn't likely to get out again. Page 4. I will not join their military. Eventually, I'll think like they do, and I will not let them ruin my life. You must understand, Goethe. His eyes pled with me to accept his decision, but I couldn't. Yes, I understood the desire to leave, and his frustrations over feeling that there was no hope for him here. I felt just as boxed in as he did, maybe even more. There probably wasn't much hope for me either, and it would only get worse if he left me behind. I wanted to leave just as much as he did, but not in this way. Page 5. You can't stop me. My mind is made up. I'm gonna leave. He started to crumble up that page and tossed it in the fire with others, but this time I grabbed it and ran for a pencil. While making a lame comment to the microphones about breakfast, I smoothed the paper out again. On the back, I drew a map to the building I'd found near the wall, and then pulled out the picture Papa had sent me. On his paper, I wrote, "Meet me here after school. Be careful." Fritz looked up at me, his eyes burning with curiosity. I wrote one more word, tunnel. Once I was sure he knew where to go, I crumpled up his paper and tossed it into the fire. She told him. Chapter 18. Start with what is right rather than what is acceptable. Franz Kafka, German author. I arrived at the building first, and despite how anxious I was to get down into the shelter and begin digging, I forced myself to wait in the basement to be sure Fritz got in safely. He approached the building the same way I had, using the shadow of the wall to hide him. I waved him in through the window, and after he slid inside, we shut the boards up again. Fritz was bigger than me, so he had separated the boards even wider, and the nails were bent. If someone really looked at this window, they might notice that the boards didn't shut tight anymore. That made me nervous, but there wasn't much we could do about it. He started to talk, but I'd already opened the heavy metal door into the air raid shelter and quietly motioned him to follow me. The shovel was down there too, ready to begin. Without saying a word, Fritz stood in the shelter, inspecting it just as I had a day earlier. He opened the crates, patted at the walls, and dug into the dirt to test it. His eyes ran along the ceiling, no doubt questioning where the line for the Berlin Wall should be. If we weren't beneath it already, then it couldn't be more than a meter away. "How did you find this place?" he asked. In a whispered voice, I told him everything, about seeing Dominic and Papa, the dance Papa did on the platform, and getting the picture from Anna. I fully expected his excitement to grow at the prospect of tunneling to freedom, to see his eyes widen the way mine had when I first realized the possibilities down here. If he had planned to swim the Spree anyways, this was a much safer plan, and this offered the chance for all of us to get to the west. But instead of showing any enthusiasm, it was just the opposite. With every new revelation, his shoulders slumped further, and the light dimmed in his face. "You were young when Father left, so you didn't know him as well." The tone in Fritz's voice was sympathetic, as if my innocence deserved his pity. "You must have misunderstood his message, if there even was a message. Father never would have asked us to put ourselves in this much danger. Never." "But he did, Fritz. I saw him, and you didn't." "You saw him doing a children's dance and read meaning into it. Then why did he send that picture? How do you know it was from him?" In frustration, Fritz turned from me and ran a hand through his hair. "How do you know it's not some test from the Stasi to get us here and then have a legitimate reason to arrest us?" "They don't play games like that." "They do, Goethe. They do it all the time. If they believe our family has some sort of rebellious streak, do you really think they'll sit back and wait for us to commit a crime when they could just trap us now? Or maybe Anna's family drew this picture to lure us here so they can turn us into the Stasi and get forgiven for what Peter did." "Anna's family wouldn't?" "Yes, they would. And if you want to stay naive about how dangerous this tunneling idea is, then you have no business even thinking about it. Our friends could betray us. Family members could betray us. Some stranger in the street could report us, and we'd never know who it was. There is nobody we can trust." But he had said it. Us, Fritz and me, together. Fritz would never betray me, and even if the Stasi locked me up for a century and did their worst, I would never betray him. I picked up the shovel and pushed it in the dirt wall. "Look at the way it crumbles, Fritz. This is soft dirt." He put his hands to it, and more dirt fell. "Where's the boundary for the death strip?" I pointed to his feet. "You're standing on it now." He stood back and watched me, which was something. At least he wasn't leaving and dragging me away with him. We could never do something this big, Fritz said. I don't know a thing about tunneling. We can figure it out as we go, I said. All we have to do is keep moving forward and make sure the ground above us doesn't cave in. A couple of weeks of digging and then we're out on the other side. They sweep the death strip with sound sensors, he said. But thanks to this shelter, we're already pretty deep. If only we knew how wide the death strip is here. Now his mind was working. And we would have to make sure this tunnel came out into a safe place on the other side, inside another building or something. How can we find the exit when we can't see over there? We can figure that out too, I said. And Anna's apartment isn't far away. I can see the death strip from her bedroom and figure out how wide it is from there. How will you get inside? She isn't speaking to you. I shrugged. First, I had to get him to agree to this plan. Details like getting into an ex-friend's home could be worked out afterwards. Fritz took the shovel and dug at the dirt, trying it for himself. Within a few minutes, he already had a gap wide enough that he could stand inside it. Then he turned around. What would we do with all the dirt? There's going to be a lot of it. We can leave it in the room right above us. Nobody looks in there, so it won't be noticed. Yes, but we would be. It takes a long time to dig this. Someone will see us coming and going from here and start to wonder why, and we'll be dirty with no way to wash off until we get home. I'd already thought about that, too. On my way to bringing the shovel here, Frau Eberhardt asked where I was going. I told her the shovel was for a garden. What if we did plant one right outside the building? It's only dirt out there, and nobody appears to be using it. We could garden in the day while people are watching, and then tunnel when they aren't. He dug at the tunnel again. His way of thinking it was over. I don't know, Gerda. I grabbed his arm. This is better than trying to swim the spree. You'll die if you go that way, and whether you make it to the other side or not, what will the Sassi do to Mama and me afterward? We know they've terrified Anna's family. Do you want them to come after us that way? No, he mumbled. No, of course not. If you're going to escape, then we need a way for all of us to escape. We're a family, Fritz. Half of us are already on the other side. If we're going across, to be together, it has to be all of us. Fritz stared at me for a moment and crouched down to stare at the dirt wall in front of him. You're right, he finally said. My heart leapt. Then we're building a tunnel? No. Fritz drew himself back to his full height. No, you're right about the danger. Mama will be home on Sunday, and she'll never agree to this plan. I don't know what message Papa intended to send to you, but he wouldn't want us to dig either. If anyone could make such a crazy idea work, it's you. But it's not worth the risk to our family. This was a good plan, and it was slipping through my fingers like water. Simile. Listen to me, please. If we just... It's over, Gerta. Then he rubbed my head with his hand, something I didn't appreciate at all this time. Remember, he did that before, and she liked it because it reminded her of their familial traditions. We climbed back up the ladder into the basement and pulled the boards close as best we could, never to return there again.